All right. Hey, can you hear me? Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'm thinking the PC might have been the issue. Well,
All
okay.
right. Okay. Cool.
So yeah, fortunately, one of my main reason for doing this is partly because it's like I like having these conversations, but the continuity in these Twitter ones aren't as important because I can just clip it and post it to YouTube. So it's like we got some good sound bites from that whole last one, and yeah, I'm thinking. Let me continue on where you were talking about Kabbalah. So you were talking about how Kabbalah was becoming more accessible. So one thing I want to say is generally I'm skeptical of any kind of these esoteric mystic traditions that are sworn to secrecy. So it's like I can't dismiss everyone who wants to do it because it's like you're saying that hey, maybe if I'm more experienced and I can be bridled by Torah and God's law before I start getting into that stuff. It's like, hey, I'm not going to shame anyone who tries taking a path like that, but just for me, mysticism is something I'm very skeptical of. If you know about my experience with psychedelics and trying that, I'm not going to get into details there, but it's just I've had very bad experiences, so it's like maybe I'm a little bit biased. But what I will say, to give these people the benefit of the doubt is so in a certain way, these people can end up making it work in some way, but that's because it's very gate kept, right? But what you had leading up to the whole Rosicrucian Enlightenment, when everyone started getting into this Kabbalah, is you had the printing press. So I'm not saying the printing press was bad in any way. It's like overall, I think the printing press was good, but that ability to communicate information on a very large scale that can be used to psyop people and that can be used for social engineering pretty easily. And I think that's exactly what happened with Kabbalah. So you're seeing the same thing with the internet right now. It's like the internet takes the decentralization of knowledge to an even higher degree. But one of the reasons why Operation Christian Nationalism and even like the social justice psyops are able to work so well is because you have so many people coming up who are able to run their mouths, and then they're propped up by the algorithm as a sort of manufactured consensus. So you have a lot of people who will they have like logical theological points, right? You look at these like Thomistic Catholic Telegram channels, these Eastern Orthodox ones. Muslims have this, Jews have this, but you have more and more of these balkanized communities getting in really deep into this stuff, but they have absolutely no oversight. And it turns out there actually is some oversight, but it's just not really accountable. I'd say you had the same thing going on to a lesser degree going on back in the 1600s and then 1700s, going from the transition from Sabbateanism to Frankism, right? So you had all these people getting into, well, I'd argue these esoteric traditions like Kabbalah, Kundalini, all these different counterparts are dangerous. But if you're going to do it, at least have a guide that's experienced, because if you don't, that can result in mass psychosis, I'd argue. And
Yeah.
once you look at a lot of these like figures who are pushing that stuff, it's like they had a lot of personality disorders that strikes me as like bipolar, schizophrenic, right? Like not
I
entirely
actually,
not entirely mentally stable, but
yeah. Well, it's interesting because like when I was living in Israel, I was once at the Kotel, the Western Wall, and it was probably like 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, and I happened to get into a conversation with this guy, and we were just talking about New York, where we were both from. And this guy comes up to us and he's like, "Oh, you guys are from Brooklyn too?" He's like, "I'm from Avenue U," and we're like, "Oh, what are you doing out here?" And it turns out he had basically left his wife and kids, left his family, and just became a nomadic Kabbalistic. Um, just he just basically devoted his whole life to it, and he left his family behind, and that's completely antithetical That's why there's the parameters of Jewish law, because if it brings you to a point where you're leaving your family behind for no other reason, then you're not following what you're supposed to be doing. And you could be susceptible to that, and that's not something that Judaism would promote. So it's actually against what he should have been doing.
Well, yeah. So here's the operational utility, though. Here's the operational utility. It's like I was kind of going off pretty long, but I was going somewhere with it. No, what you said actually helps strengthen the point that I'm making. So when it comes to the Enlightenment, one of the recurring themes I'd argue when it comes to social engineering, and the Frankist movement had the same effect, the Sabbatean movement had the same effect, is just rebelling against authority. Like the old authorities don't work. We have all this disorder, we have persecutions, we have the 30 Years' War, yada yada yada. We need something new. And that's exactly what I think is going on with the way that the whole decentralization of knowledge and mystical traditions being rolled out is, because it's like, so I'm just going to give you the benefit of the doubt. Like I can't tell you that all of Kabbalah is illegitimate. I've studied a good bit, but I'm no expert on, like, there's so many people who know more than me. It's like I'm connecting different subjects to other ones in a way that I think gives a big picture, but it's like I wouldn't say I'm an expert on any single one of these, right? But like let's just say that, there is something to Kabbalah. Well, just running your mouth on it and picking up a few books like a lot of these people do, that's not enough. But what happens is when people pick up a few books, or when people go on these Telegram channels for a modern equivalence, they're like, oh my gosh, I just found the most profound truths of the universe, and none of the people I know are covering this stuff. So rather it's in a Judaic context, an Islamic context, a Christian context, that ends up setting the younger generation against the older generation. That ends up creating a whole new, like, progressive versus conservative, old ways versus new ways dialectic in society, and that just creates all kinds of conditions for social engineering.
Well, that's how they like. I mean, that's they teach Kabbalah. There's a Kabbalah center not that far from me, and it's open to everybody. And I think really it's more of just they want people to start with that and then move on to other things. I actually think that they like the idea, as as people mess with things that they're not ready for, that they're not really understanding of, and it just leads them into into darkness. It leads them to becoming things and losing their minds and breaking away from their families, from friends. That's like, if you ever see in in India, they have the sadhu, which are I think they worship like a single face of Vishnu. It's kind of like a proto monotheism, and part of they're also mystics. They smoke a ton of hash. They look at they believe in the radical singularity, in the radical one. So meat is meat, whether it's meat that you pulled out of the Ganges that belonged to a funeral pyre, or a giant filet mignon. It's all meat. It's all one. It's all the same. And part of what these people do is they disconnect from their families, they disconnect from reality, and they don't have any sort of normalcy. There's no foundation of their life. There's no value. It's all just being lost in this mysticism. And some people could say it's a heightened form of enlightenment. I would see it more as just being in darkness, because if you have nothing, like, I'm not saying that you need the material, but I think the idea of not giving yourself, of like devoting yourself entirely to mysticism, and abandoning the things like having a family and having friends and having stability and having purpose, more so is not leading you in a good path. And I think that's one of the things that has led to what in Europe they wanted people to mess around with Ouija boards and mess with things that would bring them into darkness, that would bring, not everybody's going to be an expert. It's like some people can learn to drive a car very fast and do lots of tricks, and then there's the people who will smash into a tree. So, not everybody is going to be able to learn to drive like Jeremy Clarkson. Most people are going to crash into the tree. So they want everybody to at least attempt it and see who crashes into the tree, and most people will, and others will actually, become masters,
Well,
and that separates.
well, like, and it makes people totally susceptible, and also it's like I actually think that's part of the purpose of the antinomianism that the Sabbatean movement picked up on. Because, like, well, oh yeah, one thing I wanted to get at though on the last stream before it crashed out is, in a sense, Sabbateanism was still around. It was in Poland. It was in Poland, Ukraine. So Jacob Frank, he came from Ukraine, and if you look at what Sabbateanism was after his death, because like obviously the whole Messiah figure is not going to work because their Messiah figure's dead. But the key components were this whole shoot, I forgot how to pronounce that guy's name. That specific brand of Kabbalah that came around in the 16th century. Yeah. It's like yeah. I'm just bad with names like that. But yeah, there's this whole set of propositions. But yeah, what I'd argue is that the antinomian tendencies, it's like on the surface, it's like, yeah, anarchy, reject authority. It's like it looks anti-authoritarian, but that kind of conditioning actually makes it easier to put a boot on people's neck, and because like they can't control their lives, so who's going to control their lives for them? Well, some kind of authority figure, and it's usually the people who are injecting this kind of confusion into the ecosystem in the first place.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's a big part of it, because it does drive people. I mean, that's even how with psychedelics. A lot of people, when they, we don't want to get too much off on a tangent, but even with stuff like ayahuasca, a lot of people go out down south and they'll do a whole thing of ayahuasca, when the actual shamanic method for doing ayahuasca is actually in increments. You're not supposed to start off with a hero's dose. You're supposed to start off slowly and work your way up to actually get the full mystic experience of ayahuasca. You're not just supposed to, dive headfirst into it. You're supposed to build up to it.
Well, no,
So, and yeah.
That actually ties into the subject, correct? Because we're talking about Frankism, going from Sabbateanism to Frankism. That's pretty much exactly what Frank did. It's like it took the kind of orgies in antinomianism that you saw with the Sabbatean movement to like a whole nother level. They had this idea that you have ritual sex and you break all of God's law to actually break away from the whole holy realm tied to what they called the Shekinah, the feminine divine presence, because they had like a feminine versus masculine kind of dialectic in that Jewish tradition that I'd argue isn't really in the Bible as much, but they definitely put that in there. But yeah, like they had this idea where like, hey, actually liberation against all these commandments is good, following God's law. That's the exoteric. But our esoteric version, we can actually tiptoe into the dark side to get a more full perspective of the light side and blend two together and actually be better than those stupid normies. Oh yeah, and then when it comes to that whole like focus on like the whole feminine aspect of Kabbalah, that's actually where some of the whole Catholic syncretism comes in, because we talked about how Zvi from the Sabbatean movement, he had a little bit of Muslim syncretism and eventually ended up on the surface of it. You could say it's not sincere, converting to Islam. You have the same kind of thing going on with Frankism, but with Catholicism, and the whole Marian aspect was big with Frankism, because he synthesized the Marian dogmas with the already existing whole Sabbatean infrastructure and antinomianism.
Yeah, with like the Shekinah, yeah, where they created like the physical Shekinah in a way, which is I think what happened at the Lacaroni, when they turned the Torah from the crown that goes on top of the Torah to the crown that the the Torah into the what was the way that he explained it? They basically put the crown on top of the woman, so and made the woman the Torah, the woman the law. They made her the top. Because by Jewish perspective, the law is at the top, and that's why it wears the crown. That's why the Torah wears the crown, because it's at the top. It's the king of it's and they put it on the woman, and they said, and it was more of like the divine. It was more of became the worship of a divine feminine,
yes,
as opposed to the divine word, which is
well,
neither here neither masculine or feminine.
Well, that's what happens. That's what happens with the Catholicism. It's the exact same thing to do with making Mary the Queen of Heaven and making her the co-mediatrix with Christ. And what it ends up turning into is, well, yeah, Christ is the intermediary to the Father and to God, but we got to go to Mary to get to Christ, because Christ is so remote. So she ends up, for all intents and purposes, becoming like the fourth member of the Trinity. But if you look into the way, because I'd say when it comes to both the Sabbatean Frankists, but also certain parts of Catholicism, they're making category errors with like masculine versus feminine that isn't really found in Scripture. So I'd say, like, rather you're looking at the Old Testament the Jews accept, or the New Testament also with Christians accept, if you want to get really philosophical, masculine feminine relationships, it's like once you go up to the Godhead, there's not like this relation of masculine versus feminine aspects. Like masculine and feminine in this context refers to who submits to who. So in that sense, there is nothing more masculine than God. So that's not to say that women or the feminine can't represent God the same way men can in like, a theological sense. That's not to say that women are inferior at reflecting God as image bearers of God to them, but I just say there's this categorical misconception that ends up inverting the transcendent with the immanent. And that's where you end up getting all this like weird Mother Earth worship stuff in there. And another thing I want to point out is how all these traditions, they end up having orgies. It's like if you've inverted the transcendent with the immanent, well, on one hand, they're going to be saying that, hey, matter, physicality, it's all a prison. We have the gnosis that can see through it. But because they've inverted the whole metaphysics on how the transcendent and the immanent, and the immanent means like the here and now. It's like if we're talking about matter being fake, being a prison, and spirits above, like matter would be the immanent. But they're pretty much making that their ultimate reality. So that's why sex is seen as so big and transcendent. It's like their reference point is still the physical, even though they claim to oppose the physical. Like, oh, we know that this is all an illusion. So let's have sex and let's see all this sacred symbolism and orgies. It's because, like, if you remove the transcendent, you don't understand the transcendent, then there's nothing more profound like in the physical realm than sex. It's like a profound experience. It can make life. So I'd also say that's another reason why you see all these like sects getting into orgies, even though their official religious texts completely condemn all that behavior.
Yeah. Well, I think in Judaism, and don't quote me on this, but I think that the divine, because the Shekinah is just a divine presence. It is not, it's not a biblical word. It's a word to describe something, and it's a word to describe, like in the inner sanctum of the temple, where the Holy of Holies, there was the divine presence. So they describe, that's what the term that they use for is Shekinah. But I think that what the divine masculine and the divine feminine translate to into Judaism is actually is marriage. That's why, unlike a lot of the other cultures that Judaism evolved around, pre-Christian cultures, there was a lot of sexual debauchery, and this comes up in the Talmud quotes that are the misquoted Talmud quotes, because of the fact that there was things like sexual hospitality, which the Frankists and the Sabbateans both practiced, which is absolutely forbidden in Judaism, because you're only supposed to have sex with your wife. You're only supposed to And I think that's where it comes in, is that when the divine feminine, and that's love that creates the life. And I think that's symbolized in like the way in a Jewish marriage, and also why Judaism at that time was considered a very prude culture, because, why would you deprive yourself? And because the divine masculine, divine feminine were reserved for creation of life, for the creation for the what would be the creation of life when you get married in the presence of God, and then that's the product of it. So that's how I always saw how the divine feminine and the divine masculine translate into Judaism, because because it makes a lot of sense as to why Judaism, stopped allowing you to have, polygamy became forbidden in Judaism, where even today in some fringe Christian religions it's still allowed. Even like in Mormonism or in Islam, you can have up to 4 wives, but it kind of takes the divinity out of a couple, out of a single couple that becomes one. And that's the entwining of the divine masculine, divine feminine, is getting married and having kids. And that's why I also think that they went against it so much, like the Sabbateans and the Frankists, why they were so much against it, because for them it was like, what, every woman can, why should you have a union to create that when you can just have sex to create that?
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing though. Like in both Christianity, Judaism, and also you can find some of this in Islam. The idea
Mhm.
is that like marriage is a reflection of the divine unity. But
Right.
what I was getting at though is that
Mhm.
there's not the sense of metaphysical dualism in the Godhead itself, where like God himself is this dance between masculine and feminine, like you have in a lot of these Eastern traditions. And obviously once you have like Gnosticism and Hermeticism being synthesized with Catholicism, Protestantism through Rosicrucianism, like in Masonry, you do have that masculine versus feminine dualism in the Godhead. But yeah, like what I'm getting at though is without that whole metaphysical structure though, it does end up inverting the transcendent with the immanent. So then once you have the transcendent and the immanent inverted, you that ends up getting inverted down in practice also. So that's why once you remove the sacredness from sex, pretty much anything goes. You can start having orgies, and yeah, you have all the debauchery that you were talking about.
Yeah, you get that leads to licentiousness, and it kind of takes the divinity out of it. It takes the divinity out of what life of the creation of life. At that time, they didn't really have prophylactics in the way that we do now. So you could get pregnant by anybody, and if that kid may not be your kid, but it didn't really matter, because it really did. You raised it as your own, but it does. That's why bastards is such a big problem in Judaism as well, because it's the product of a licentious relationship that lacks a divine creation. There wasn't a there it lacked the the love and the entwining of the female and the male to create the child, to create life. It's just life created through pleasure with nothing divine to it. And that's one of the reasons why bastards are such a big problem in the Jewish faith, to the point where I don't even think they're allowed to get, well, I know they can't marry into a Kohen, but I think even in general they can't get married. I'll look into it a little bit more, but that would make sense why.
Okay, yeah. So then I wanted to ask you a little bit though, because you've done a little bit more reading into this. So did how does the whole Asiatic Masonic tradition you're talking about relate to Sabbatean Frankism? It's like, so is this something that followed the creation of the 1717 English Grand Freemasonry? Like, how does it relate to these other sects like Rosicrucianism, Continental Masonry? That's something I'm interested in, how it relates to the whole timeline of Jacob Frank.
So it came after the mass conversions. It came. Hold on. Let me actually turn to it because. But it did come after the conversions, and after the conversions, they did create the Asiatic lodges that were based on Kabbalistic tradition, and of course they were open to Gentiles and they were open to Jews. So it allowed them to share, you know, because there was obviously Christian Kabbalah, but so it allowed them to share it with their neighbors. But here,
Well,
let me
while you're
find it.
looking for it, let me ask this. So, is there any like kind of formal or provable connection between that and English Grand Masonry, Continental Masonry? Like, which one would you say it's more related to? Because like obviously, it's like all these esoteric organizations are pretty much like one thing behind the scenes, but it's just a matter of which one is more attached to.
Well, I don't know. Well, let me see which year this was because I believe it would have been after the 1770s. So it would have been probably part of the moderns, the modern free and accepted. So it probably would have been part of um Oriental.
Yeah. So,
Let me
yeah. Okay. That makes well, yeah, and since they're connected to the Illuminati and stuff, that makes sense also because
Right.
yeah. Oh yeah, and the Illuminati infiltration. That's also something worth talking about.
So hold on, let me see where. There was a whole section on it. I'll read it quick. 224. So there was a whole thing. Frankism and the secret societies. In the sheer numbers, there were probably never so many secret sects and societies in Europe as between 1750 and 1789. The connection between the Frankists and these groups has been elaborated in the works of Jacob Katz, Gershom Scholem, and the focus of their investigation was the Order of the Asiatic Brethren, the order known initially as Die Ritter or Die Bruder des Lichts and later Die Brüder St. Johannes die Evangelisten of Asien in Europa, was founded in Vienna in 1780 or 1781 and was avowed purpose of creating a Masonic organization accepting both Jews and Christians in its ranks. The central figures in the founding of the order were impoverished Bavarian aristocrat Hans Heinrich von Ecker und Eckhoffen and Moses Dobruschka. Moses Dobruschka, I think, was related to Rabbi Eibeshut. It was either his grandson, I believe it was his grandson.
Oh, from Vienna to okay, this is
Yeah,
fascinating. All right, yeah, I gotta read more into this. Yeah, that's Vienna. That's like the Habsburg heartland. That's the same family of Rudolph II, who, as I was getting at earlier, brought in all the Jews who were practicing Kabbalah into Prague, where you had that Protestant synthesis that created Rosicrucianism, and it was right before the 30 Years' War. So it's like you had these mystic traditions spreading around. Then the 30 Years' War kind of exacerbated it because it's like, oh, wait a second, like these older traditions aren't working, but hey, we have this new novel stuff. So yeah, that's fast. Oh yeah, and the timing of that, right? You said 1774 to 1789, right before the French Revolution.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
There you go.
And let me see if it says where. Oh, okay. So it says, of course, Moses Dobruschka was not Rabbi Eibeshutz's grandson. So my apologies on that. However, it is true that Dobruschka developed a unique syncretic Masonic rite, mingling traditionally Christian Masonic concepts with elements of esoteric Jewish law, and incorporating portions of Eibeshutz's Sabbatean Triest, Vayavo Hayom El Ha'ayin, which is, and I will come the day of the eye into the ritual. The syncretic character of the order derived, according to Sholem, from Dobruschka's roots in Sabbatean environment, where distinctions between the two religions were already blood to significant extent. Similarly, the rites of the order included ceremonies from which the Jewish perspective had a very strong antinomian flavor, such as a ritual feast on pork and milk. In Sholom's view, these elements should not be attributed to the Christian members' desire for the Jews to accommodate the prevailing dietary habits of non-Jewish society. Rather, they are indicative of Sabbatean doctrine of ritual violation of the principles of Mosaic law.
So yeah, and one other thing I want to point out with how it's interesting that this ended up coming from Vienna is because a lot of people don't realize the connection between Habsburg and the Illuminati. So it's like Adam Weishaupt who created. Oh yeah, and you said there were Bavarians involved with its founding also, which is fascinating. So yeah, 1773 is actually when the Bavarian Illuminati was informally created through the World Revolutionary Movement, which was actually chaired by Mayor Rothschild, right? And Adam Weishaupt was in attendance. But the person who actually initiated Adam Weishaupt in the mysteries earlier that year in Egypt was Charles Lorraine, the Duke of Lorraine, the brother of Francis Lorraine, who married Empress Teresa of Habsburg. So he was a Grand Master for the German Teutonic Knights. So Habsburg was running the German Teutonic Knights. They had a big presence in Vienna, obviously. And after Charles Lorraine passed away as the Grand Master, you end up having Maximilian Habsburg there. And he was based in Vienna. He was brothers of the Holy Roman Emperors. I believe it was Stephen. I'm trying to remember who the other one was, because I read a book on the Habsburg Empire that covers this. I just can't remember all the names because it's so there's so many names that these books throw out. But yeah, it's Habsburg. They always pose as like we're the traditionalist Christians, but behind the scenes they're always syncretists. Well, not always. It's actually a lot of times. So Maximilian Habsburg, he never became the emperor. He was I think he was the fourth born from Maria Therese and Francis Lorraine. A lot of times what you end up having is a lot of these power players end up being the non-heirs, because hey, you're not getting appointed as many formal positions. What are you going to do? Well, you're going to go into the occult and start creating all these shadowy organizations and exercising power through there. So yeah.
And if I may read something quick from here,
Yeah, go for it.
It's a paragraph, but I think you guys will find this interesting. In July-September 1782, an international Masonic gathering convened in Wilhelmsbad. The aim of the convention was to define the aims and purpose of the existence of Masonry, to unify splintered Masonic and para-Masonic groups, and to clear up the confusion regarding conflicting and often contradictory rites and traditions. A significant part of this effort was to cleanse Masonry of unwelcome political influences and elements contaminating its Christian character. The Asiatics figured high on both scores. Some of the convention's participants considered the order to be a treacherous concoction of the Jesuits and a secret hideaway of ex-Jesuits. Others denounced it as an impure source polluting the flow of truly Christian esotericism.
Okay, that's interesting. Also, yeah, whenever it comes to all these organizations that come up around between like the 1773 and 1789, one common denominator I always notice is the Jesuit order, and that's also who was overseeing Claremont College when the degrees for the Scottish Rite Freemasonry were also being codified. But yeah, so from what you know, what kind of role did the whole Frankist movement have in the French Revolution, and what kind of relationship they have with the Bavarian Illuminati? Because the narrative I hear a lot is you had the Sabbatean movement of Jewish messianism. It went underground. It got a facelift from Jacob Frank. Then you have all these Jews that had a strong in-group preferences that wanted to bring about their Messiah. So then they infiltrated the Illuminati. They infiltrated Freemasonry. They created Chadbad, and now they control everything. Like the Knights of Malta and Jesuits aren't as powerful because it's the Sabbatean Frankists and Chadbad running everything.
Well, what's interesting here is that according to the Jewish efforts to secure emancipation ran parallel with the history of their relations with Freemasons. If the Frankists were indeed persecuted, in quotes, by both Jewish and Christian religious establishment, they could only hope to find refuge in an organization that adopted a universalistic position, claiming that there was fundamentally only one religion common to mankind. So I think it makes a lot of sense why people would say that the Frankists infiltrated the Illuminati, and why the Illuminati had Frankism in it, because that makes perfect sense. Because if they were kind of caught between two worlds where they were not accepted on the Jewish side, they were not accepted on the Christian side. So where would they end up? In universalism, and that's where I think also Illuminati infiltrated the Masonic lodges in order to spread Illuminism. And it would make sense then why you would get that in there, because I think also Napoleon, he reestablished, or tried to reestablish, the Sanhedrin. He also tried to invade and take over Jerusalem. And I guess one could say that maybe either Jews, or at least Frankist Jews, might have seen that as, oh, another Cyrus, another attempt to reestablish the temple, or to reestablish, Jewish
Well,
control, which would make,
Zionism came from
them a
Corsica. Zionism came in a lot of ways. Zionism came from Corsica, where Napoleon came from, also. So that's that's pretty interesting.
yeah. Let me see one other thing, because I know there's a couple of others here that were pretty.
Well, what I was while you're looking for it, let me add that, like, universalism, let's abolish all hierarchy, let's dissolve all borders, let's have this communist utopia. Like, all of that's like pretty much a conceptual package deal. You'll have people that'll believe some of those propositions, not believe the others, but all of that was pretty much codified and coined with the Bavarian Illuminati. Or actually, I brought this up in my other stream that I did, but communism was coined by Restif in, I believe it was 1768, and it was in a straight up novel that had like foot fetish and porn in it. And communism was coined a lot with like this kind of allegory, right? It wasn't like this kind of political treatise that you had of Karl Marx, but it's like you had the same concepts, and it was leading up the French Revolution. You had a bunch of literary traditions where you'd have like sometimes you'd have people traveling between different islands. Other times, there was one where it was actually like people traveling different planets. So you actually had sci-fi back in like the 1700s. But oh my gosh, like it was each of these worlds or islands would be like different thought experiments, and that's actually where communism came from. You had Illuminists writing this book, so like this predates the Illuminati, but those people like Resif ended up joining Adam Weishaupt's ranks. So that's just worth pointing out.
Yeah. So I want to point. This was also an interesting thing. The development of Frankism in the late 1770s and 1780s again attested to his abilities. At the early stages of the development of the movement, Frank utilized Christian millenarian teachings about the ultimate conversion of the Jewish people, and presented himself as a kind of apostle to the Jews. However, during the later period, the Frankists began to use the surrounding mythology of secret societies and to develop relationships with Freemasons. Frank's first biographer, Hippolyte Skimborowicz, mentioned in his unpublished account of the history of Polish Freemasonry that Frank called upon his followers in Poland to seek contacts with Polish and Russian Freemasons. Interesting, because you were talking about Russian Freemasonry recently in Spain. Baptized Frankists were said to have flocked to Masonic lodges following the French Revolution.
Well, yeah. So another thing I want to point out is, I don't know if it's as much as Illuminati infiltrating Freemasonry, but I think what you're looking at is a bunch of informal groups who we're not going to find as much documentation of. And I'd say the big one is the Jesuits, but you also have a little bit of British intelligence. So it looks like the Illuminati, actually, there were multiple attempts to create it, and then the Illuminati is actually what took off and was able to end up penetrating all these groups and end up creating like Communist International and the Mafia, because it's like the Illuminati formally it ended in like before the French Revolution. I think it was like 1784 when it officially ended, but like it just splinters off, renames, becomes new like the circle of friendship with like Nicholas Bonneville. Like all this nonsense that came from Palais Royale, or like you had, oh yeah, like this books I was talking about where you had like islands, planets, and all these different thought experiments. Like, oh my gosh, can you imagine what the world would be like with this? Like a bunch of that was later on coordinated and sponsored by the Duke of Orleans for the French Revolution. But yeah, what I was getting at though with pre Illuminati, so you had attempts to, it was essentially putting in mind control methods to make like perfect soldiers within Freemasonry, where
Right.
you'd initiate, as you initiate people in the upper degrees. It's less about speculative Freemasonry as it was originally conceived, and more about pretty much Hashisheen. Think Hashisheen, where they put you on drugs, they
Yeah.
radicalize you and pretty much make you killers, and you'll do whatever you're ordered. Or maybe you're not going to be like a killer. Maybe your weapon is a pen, but either way, you're releasing mayhem on society. At first, it was called strict observance, and that also came from Germany. I forgot if it was Bavaria or not. I would not be surprised if it was Bavaria, but strict observance, it kind of flopped, and then you have the exact same methods retried at the Bavarian Illuminati. And what's interesting is you have a lot of people like Bill Cooper argue that like the Illuminati is pretty much like the progeny of the Hashisheen itself. But yeah, like
Yeah,
I just want to point.
I think
Yeah.
that's why they infiltrated, because I think Freemasonry, at least the first 3 degrees, I think it more has to do with, the idea of building society, of like building, of just like physically building. And I think the Illuminati, the reason why it was, it's more about, instead of building for man, it's the rebuilding of man. And that's why the Illuminati became all about, infiltrating people's minds and completely changing how people think and how people operate. And it's, putting people kind of into, the material only. It's like, I'm the material, I'm the god, I'm the center of everything. And and it was designed, I think, to to give people an artificial enlightenment, where we're going to give you the enlightenment that we want to give you, and that we're going to use to kind of take over people's minds, and instead of building for the physical, you're building for the kind of the mental, the metaphysical. You're changing the way people naturally think. You're taking out people's natural ability. As I always say, we live in the age of the death of cognitive dissonance. So when people don't have cognitive dissonance, don't have critical thinking, but you give everybody all this information, all this, mysticism, you just dump it on their feet and you let them do with it what they want. And most people are not going to use it correctly. And there's no morality to it because it's purely Hegelian. They want you to screw it up so then they can come and fix it.
Well, yeah, and like that's why